It's a wet, rainy period here in Harabakoa in the mountains, and I have to cut my time outside a little bit short. And so I spend a little bit of time checking up on my emails and going onto social media and just being reminded that I have messages in a place I normally don't check for messages. And there was a message from a young man that I met some 6 years ago, which prompted this video. And I'm going to title it Boat Kids, because I was once a kid around boats, and it was totally transformative in my life. This was about passion. I was passionate to be on the water. I was passionate to be on a boat. I was passionate to be involved in anything associated with nautical affairs. And I was surrounded by people who shared that passion. But there was a very unique group that I really was envious of. Those were the sailing families, the cruising families. And I grew up in the crossroads of Cape Town, Southern Africa, the Indian Ocean on the one side, the Atlantic on the other side. People coming from one ocean heading to the other ocean. There were so many people who were either about to leave on an around the world voyage, or they were part of the way through the around the world voyage. And one day, this Australian boat arrived in Cape Town, and they had two kids on board, Nicholas and Justine. And I was working on my boat. I just launched my boat at the time was called Stella R, my little 38 footer that I went on, not realizing I was going to go on to race her solo around the world. But I had dunked my outboard engine in the water, and I'd sent it to the dealership that I bought it from to get it started, to get it working. And it ran for a weekend, and then it wouldn't start again. So I'm pulling and pulling and pulling, and nothing is happening. And this kid walks down the dock, and I'd seen him on the dock because he lived on a boat at the end of the dock, a big ferro cement boat. And he said to me, "What's wrong?" I said, "I can't get my engine started." So he took off the cover, and I told him what had happened, and he said, "No, we can't do it here. We've got to put the engine on the dock." So we took it off the bracket and we took it onto the dock, and he started dismantling the engine. And I was, oh, gee. And I was very, oh, wow, this is a kid. What does he know? I should be taking it back to the dealer where I bought it from. And he said, "I bet you they didn't clean everything." And he spoke with such authority. And he was just so casually just pulling things apart. And then he said, it looks like they didn't pull out the cylinder. Go over and find my dad and ask him for the cylinder puller. He's in the boatyard, in the back of the boatyard, working on a boat. Well, at this point, I was committed. There were many pieces laying on the dock that I did not know how to assemble, let alone how to take apart. So I went to go and find his dad, Graham, and I explained what my situation was, and that his son, Nicholas, was tearing my engine apart, and he wanted the cylinder puller, whatever that was. And he said, "Oh yeah, here it is, and he's probably going to need this wrench, and by the way, here's some spray he's going to probably want." And his father was just very nonchalant, like, "Yeah, these are the toys that the kid grew up playing with, so what's your problem?" So I get back to the dock where the boat is and the engine, and there's even more pieces that have been dismantled. So I watched him go to work, and little by little, this engine was broken down. And then there was this big smile. Says, you see, I told you, they didn't pull that out. They didn't do that. They didn't clean that. That's where the problem lies. And so he believed he had solved the problem, and then he began to assemble everything. And another period of time went by, and there were no parts left lying in the dock. Everything was put back in. Surely there had to be something that this kid had forgotten. Surely there'd be something that this kid did not know. And then he said, "Come, let's put it back on the engine mount. I'll start on the third pull." And sure, on the third pull, it started and ran. I was so grateful to this kid. He became my friend. And we started hanging out. I'd learned that he was conceived on the water, and the family was on another voyage around the world. And they were heading for Richards Bay, South Africa. but they lost their engine out in the Indian Ocean, in the Mozambique Channel. And they didn't have the spare parts of whatever had gone wrong. And so Graham got on the satellite, got on the single sideband radio, this is before satellite, and spoke to some docs about his situation, that his wife is going to go into labor pretty soon and they're not going to make South Africa. And through telecommunications of a single sideband radio and ham radio, they spoke Graham in how to deliver his son. Nicholas was born some 200 miles shy of the African coast. So just jumping ahead, years later, I'm doing the O-Star race from England to America, and I've just done a television show with BBC. And early this morning, there's this banging on my hull, and I'm still asleep. I'm still in my bunk. The family had seen me on television. They had sailed to England. They jumped on a train. They took a 2-hour train ride to show up in Plymouth to come and knock on the hull to say, "Hey, so happy to see you." And at this point, Nicholas had become a master shipwright. He had followed his passion of the sea and the sailing. And so I look at the people I've met, the kids that I met, and how they matured and how they took different paths in their life. And Darlene and I were sailing in El Gecko. It was New Year. It's about 10, 11 years ago. We were in Guadeloupe in The Hague. And there was a big cruising boat. And so I saw they were flying their Q flag, the yellow flag, and I went over and said, "Hey, I've been trying to clear in and customs, not bothered, it's holidays. They told me to come back in a couple of days' time, so don't bother walking the 10 minutes over to the customs immigration office." And that's how I met the Granger family. And I got to meet their daughter. They were 3 kids. They'd never sailed. They bought a boat, and they chose to sail around the world. And I asked Emily, the eldest daughter, what is one of the greatest things about living on a boat? She said there were many things, but one of the things was they learned how to be a family. They learned to look out for each other, look after each other, to care for each other. And I said, well, what is one of the most interesting parts of your voyage? And she spoke about their time in the Red Sea and how they had gone through pirate waters and how Graham had gotten malaria and had to be flown to Egypt because they were in Yemen and there were no supplies. There was no help. And so the parents had to leave, and the kids were left alone on the boat. And they were young teenagers with Greggy, the young brother, who was probably at that time 8 years of age. Well, many years later, Emily went on to university to study international development. And in the first couple of weeks, she signed up for a class where the professor spoke about the Middle East and about Yemen. And he apparently opened up his class talking about how the Yemenis hate Americans. And as he got into his class, Emily raised her hand and said, "Excuse me, but have you been to Yemen?" I said, "Why would I want to go to Yemen? The Yemenis hate Americans. I'm American." He said, "Do you know any Yemenis people?" He said, "Why would I want to know terrorists? They hate us." He said, "Well, let me tell you something. I lived there for 5 months. In our voyage around the world, we stopped in Yemen and we engaged with the people. And I got to know the community. They didn't hate us. Hatred is something that is taught." Emily had the confidence as a 19, 20-year-old woman to challenge her professor to rethink. Someone who's never traveled to a part of the world, but he had an opinion, where she had been in a part of the world and had an experience. There's a big difference between opinion and actual encounters. And again, another boat kid. So here we are in Trinidad. I'd just gone through 2 serious hurricanes with El Gecko. And we're in power boats in Chaguaramas, Trinidad, and we're out of the water, and I'm working on the boat. And this kid, probably about 10 years of age, comes wandering past the boat, and he stops and he says, "Nice boat." I said, "Thank you." "We also want a catamaran." And so Paul and I got talking, and we chatted as 2 human beings for quite a few minutes. And he said, "Well, hey, I've got to go because I've got to get to the boat store. I've got to go and get some plumbing parts because there's a plumbing issue on the boat, and my job is to take care of it and fix it. So I'm just going to get the parts I need so I can get the job done. 10-year-old kid going to a boat store by himself in a foreign country outside of the gate where there's traffic didn't seem perturbed. Like, what kind of parents are these? I mean, sort of like, are these parents crazy? Just letting the kid wander off, talk to a stranger? A couple of days later, Paul showed up again at my boat and said, hey, we're having a boat party, and I was telling my parents about you and they haven't met you. So why don't you come over tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock and come and join our boat party? I said, of course I'll be there. So darling, I went over and we met the rest of the family. They were from Canada and they were sailing around the world. And we became friends. And I really got to know and respect this kid because each child on the boat had chosen what their responsibilities were. There were 4 kids, one set of twins. And I followed this family over the years. They visited us in the Dominican Republic, and they continued on through the Panama Canal and into the Pacific Ocean. And now they are in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And I just got a message from Paul, and he was sort of saying, hey, I'm just reaching out to say hi. And I remember from the time I first met him, how impressed I was with him. And then I followed their stories in social media, and they actually had a bow fitting come apart mid-ocean, and there was delamination on the boat, and some serious work had to be done straight away. Some emergency surgery had to be done. And so the father, Rick, said, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to put this board and I'm going to put these holes through to secure this board to the outside of the hull. But Paul, you're going to have to climb into the V-berth, into the full peak, into the very, very front, because you got the smallest hands, and you're going to have to tighten up these bolts. And there was no hesitation. He did that. He was part of the team because they were saving their home. They were saving their boat. They were looking out for their family. They were solving problems. Another posting, they were some 20 days at sea, no wind, knowing they couldn't really motor because they're going to need their fuel later when they approach Singapore, running low on food. And they were trying to get every little ounce of speed, knot of speed, out of the boat. And apparently, husband and wife were down below taking a nap. The kids were up on watch because the children were old enough to do the watches themselves. And when Rick and his wife came up on deck to do their own watch, they were under spinnaker. Paul had made a judgment call. The winds had switched. It was the right strength that they could carry a spinnaker. He got his brother and sister to help him launch the spinnaker. I don't think Paul is 15 years of age. So I've seen these kids who have become creative, who have become independent, who have made decisions, who have become amazing human beings, problem solvers, but also custodians of our society, custodians of our nautical legacy. And my hat is off to them. And I wish there were more young kids who stopped doing this, but did that to the open world, to the outside, because they make a difference. They see the difference. They embrace the difference. They celebrate the difference. The sea doesn't care how young or old you are, what your nationality is, your riches or your poorness. The sea makes us equally as wet. It demands our very best. And I've watched some of these kids grow up to be the very best human beings. And I'm proud to know so many cruising families who are out there truly living life.